One thing that you can add to your VPython code to make it a little more engaging with the user are widgets. Widgets are simple controls that allow the user to directly interact with the program without having to go under the hood and actually change any of the code. Using widgets in a VPython code is a great way to bridge from the those intro sims like you have in PhET sims, where the code is entirely a black box and you can't see any of it and you're just interacting with the controls, to having students work with the code itself and making changes to the procedures, changes to the numbers. It allows you to kind of bridge that because it does give you those widgets, it does give you that user interface that then you can show students under the hood what it looks like. So here what I've done is made a sample code that uses many of the widgets that are available to you in GlowScript VPython. Again, I'm doing this on glowscript.org. I believe these are available in installed VPython, but I think you still have to run it from a browser to get that. So it's probably easiest just to try this out on glowscript.org before you try it on installed Python. The first thing we'll take a look at is a button. So this is a button called Make Invisible, and when I click it, it makes the cube there in the screen invisible. You notice that the text of the button also changed because it went from Make Invisible to Make Visible. When I click it again, sure enough, it makes the cube visible. The way we do that is by setting up this function first. So you want to always assign a function to one of these widgets, otherwise they're not going to do anything for you. So we're calling this one SwitchVis for Switch Visibility. We need to always put in an argument that represents the object, the widget that we are interacting with. So in this case, I called it B because it's a button. What we'll do first is change the cube's visibility property. So cube is just this box in the center here. So we simply change it from its visible property to not its visible property. So if it's true, then visible becomes false. If visible is false, then it becomes true. And then we're also going to change the text of the button, right? So VB is the name of the button down here. So we have VB.text equals make invisible, or VB.text equals make visible, just depending on which it is now, right? So if it is now visible, we want to now have the option to make it invisible. And if it is now invisible, we want to have the option to make it visible. So that's the function. That doesn't actually create the button, that just creates the set of instructions that the button will carry out for us. To create the button, we set a button here. You need to give it a name so that you can reference that name up here in the function. And the first thing you want to tell it is what function you want to bind it to. What bind does is says whenever this widget is interacted with, I want you to call this function. This is the name of the function that I want you to call. And different widgets will have different display options. A button can have text. So we're going to start out with the default value of make invisible, and that will get changed as we interact with the button. So I can click this all day, make invisible, make visible, make invisible. What I also want you to notice is while the box is invisible, I can still interact with the animation window. So I'm right click and dragging now to rotate. When I go to make visible, the cube is rotated. Because I'm rotating the view, you just can't tell it because the cube was invisible. Next on the list, we have a slider. This slider is tied to the cube's X position. So as I slide it left, I move the cube to the left. As I slide it right, I move the cube to the right. Pretty cool. This is called a slider. First, again, we define a function. So we're going to call this one XShift because this is shifting the X direction. And basically what we do is take the cube's X position and change it to the slider's value. So whatever value the slider has, which is the printed object here, that's going to be the position of the cube. So right now I know the cube is at negative 1.05, and now I know it's at positive 2.20. So whatever value you have on the slider is going to be the value for the cube's X position. And then we're going to change the slider's caption. So we've created a caption text down here to just update based on the value here. You notice there's a little bit of Pythonese here for the formatting. You can look up how that works. I have to look it up every time because it's not an intuitive language structure for me. But basically, we're changing this thing's value to xs.value. That's x slider's value. So this slider, it doesn't know that it's changing an x coordinate. And in fact, I could have it change multiple things within the animation window. But what it knows is that it's changing this value and has to keep track of what this value is. So to create the slider, we use the slider function. Again, we have to give it a name so that we can reference that name elsewhere. And again, we have to give it a bind, right? Each one of these needs a bind or else they're not going to do anything. So we're going to bind it to the function xShift. So every time we move the slider, it's going to call xShift with this slider as an argument. And for a slider, you have to give it a min and max value. So I have a max of 5, can't go past that, and a min of -5. I can't go any more left than that. And you give it a default value, right? So if you change this default value, that's just the value that the slider starts at. So I might change that to -2. But you want to be careful with that because that doesn't actually set the cube's position to -2. It just sets the slider to -2. I haven't used the slider yet. As soon as I touch the slider, let me just click on it. Now the cube jumps to -2. So you just want to make sure, just for the user's sake, that this starting value matches whatever starting value you want in the actual animation window. Then we have this little snippet of text here. That is a W text for widget text. So it's text that goes along with a widget. And we're just calling the XS caption so that we can keep track of what XS.value is. So the value here in XS. Now, of course, I am in a 3D environment, so I can also set up a slider to change the Y component of the position, so I can move it up and down with this Y slider. So here I've just copied and pasted the text from lines 15 to 19, and the only thing I changed is what it does, right? So it changes the cube's Y position instead of the cube's X position, which is pretty cool. I can just set up the rest of it, so now I have independent controls of the cube's X and Y positions. Now, it seems a little visually odd here to have the X slider going horizontal and the Y slider going horizontal, right? Because we think of Y as going up and down. So what you can do, if you want to have a slider go vertical, you just use vertical equals true when you create the slider. Press Ctrl 2 to refresh this. And now my Y slider is vertical. Now it's not fitting very well in this window, so we might need to change the height of it or some of the dimensions here on the page. This is just to show you that it is an option. It's not necessarily the best option right now. So we'll change that back to false. False now. There we go. All right, let's move on to radio buttons. So this allows you to choose between multiple options. So I've got one called Make Blue and one called Make Red, and you can tell right away what they do. They make the cube red or blue. The way they work is I've defined a function called Change Color, right? Just always give a function name that makes sense to you. So this is going to check for whether the button is checked. Right? So for example, here I've got the red checked and the blue not checked. I could also decheck the red and get the thing back to white. So if the B is checked here, then we're going to change the cube's color to B's color. So each of these radio buttons is going to have a color attribute. It doesn't actually change a color for them. It's just recording, here is the color I want you to have for these things. Otherwise, if it becomes unchecked, we're going to change it back to white. And then we're going to go over and we're going to uncheck all the other radio buttons. This is a very important piece to have if you want your radio buttons to be one option at a time, right? It doesn't make sense to have Make Blue and Make Red both checked. So what we're going to do is loop over the list of buttons. And basically, if we are not at the current button, then we're going to turn it to false. So that's how clicking on Make Red makes, click on Make Blue turns off Make Red. Clicking on Make Red turns off Make Blue. And so here we actually create the radio button. So we bind them both to change color. Notice I can bind the same item, the same widget, to the same function, right? I can have different widgets going to the same function, but I need to have a way of checking who is interacting with it, right? So that's why I have this b.color and b.eye going on here. Then we have some text here for them, and we've got the color associated with them and the eye value for them. That's just the index of where they are in the list. And here I create the list of buttons so that I can, interact with them here and make sure all the others are turned off.
Next time we'll look at is a menu. This is where I can change the background color. So for example, I can change the background color to green. Go. So now I have a red cube on green background. Maybe I want a red cube on an orange background. So the way we're doing this, we're setting up a function to change the background, and we're just accessing scene.background to equal the menu colors that we're going to set up. Let's take a look at what that does. So the W text we're setting up here is background color equals, so that we know what it is we're changing. Then I create a list of text for the menu, black, green, cyan, orange. That's the text that shows up here in the menu. If I change one of these, like maybe I'm dubious about having cyan in my list, that now becomes cyan question mark there. Very dubious choice, I feel like. So then I set up the colors for those. So these are the actual color values: black, green, cyan, orange. If you really want to frustrate your user, just have these mismatched, right? So you can move orange. This is bad design. Don't do this. But if I move orange here, then clicking on cyan question mark changes it to orange. Clicking on orange changes it to cyan. Don't do that. Have your menu items actually do what they say they are going to do. Then we actually create the menu. So this is the actual widget. So all these are is variables to store the information about the menu. Here we are creating the actual menu. So we're going to bind to this menu the change background function. And we have to give it a list of choices. So choices determines what items appear in here. And that's going to be our menu text from above. The last thing we'll take a look at is a text input. That's where we have this enter text here. If I enter text here, lo and behold, it appears inside the label up here. So I've created a function called change label. So the label already exists, right? So I create the label here just as an empty label field. And here we're changing its text to match whatever text is in the WI. WI here is the W text input. So we call this W input, where we are asking them to enter the text here, and we are going to bind that change label. You also give it a width, so that's going to be the width of the text box here. So if you want it narrower, you can decrease the number. If you need it wider, you can increase the number. And basically, anytime I enter the text here, it's going to change the text in the label up here. So that's a great way to get input from your user. Maybe you don't want them entering text, maybe you want them entering a numerical value that they then put into the computation. This is a great way to have them input a value for a variable in your code. Now, one thing to watch out for here, when we create this label, it's going to take on the background color of the scene. But if I change the background color, it doesn't send a signal to that, right? So you might want to, if you're using this, add a line here onto change background where it changes the label's color. And then if I update the label, it's going to update that to the new background. So you might just have this change. What would that be? That would be my underscore label dot background needs to equal scene dot background, just to keep those in sync. So now if I add that piece in, let's enter some text here. 2 plus 2 equals 5 for very large values of 2. Now when I change my background color, it will update the text box as well. So anytime you have one of these changes, you just have to think about what other changes need to propagate to the other items that you have. So I hope that's helpful to you. These widgets really can add an extra layer of accessibility and engagement to your VPython codes. If you use these in one of your codes, do leave a link in the comments to the code that you've created. Would love to see what you've made. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you next time. Bye-bye.